we will call this meeting to order at 5:17. Item 2, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I'll motion.
Motion made by Chris. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Sarah. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Do we need to amend the members, the attendance?
That is the next item.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. Item 3, approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented? We want to amend the minutes to include Sarah as a member present at the last meeting. Okay. I have a motion to approve with an amendment.
I'll motion.
Okay, motion made by Chris. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second made by Bruce. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, item 4, presentations. I'm gonna hand it over to Allison Sparks to go over the financial review and considerations.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Thanks for joining us. That is just going to have our presentation on the screen, but you've also got printed copies in the folders in front of you. We don't have a very extensive agenda for today. We're sort of in a holding pattern and doing a little bit of research on the back end. So today we'll just talk about claims updates, where we stand year to date, literally through October. And then we'll talk about some plan considerations that I mentioned we're doing a little bit of research on in the background for us to hopefully be able to present to you at the next meeting. So as we kind of jump right in here, the first slide talks through our self-funded first fully insured equivalents. This is for our current plan year. So I believe you're getting familiar in viewing this document, but as we look at this, we have our dates per month there, our claims paid in that given month, the estimated fixed costs for our self-insured plan, which includes the third-party administration, the network fees, the pharmacy management fees, etc. And then our total SF cost is our total self-funded cost, which is the combination of both the claims paid and the estimated fixed costs. We also have in the second to the right column, the estimated fully insured equivalent, which is essentially what we budgeted for a month based on our average enrollment and based on the COBRA equivalent rates that were generated through our actuarial process. And then the last column there on the right is essentially our estimated loss ratio between the two. So it's the ratio between what we're actually spending in that total self-funded cost column and what we estimated in the fully insured equivalent column. So as we're kind of glancing through this, I will say that this year we're running a little bit hot. As you can see in our loss ratio column, we only have one of 4 months that is below 100%. We would ideally like to see this at 100% or lower. We'll talk a little bit about what's been going on here. As you may have speculated, we are still continuing some of those large cost claimants from last year. So will some of these claims, even though these are claims that are paid during these months, they are still potentially claims that were incurred in our prior plan year. So as we're looking at this, it's not necessarily claims incurred during these months, it's claims that were paid during these months. So if you remember from our last meeting, we did have quite a few large cost claimants. And so as they continue to have claims filed for services through June 30th, some of those will continue to show up on this, in addition to claims incurred during these periods. Make sense? Questions on that? So as it stands now for our, our current first quarter and month, so the first 4 months of a current plan year, we've spent just over $3 million in claims, with an estimated fixed cost of about $450,000. And so that estimated loss ratio, when comparing our actual spend versus the budgeted spend, we are at about 127%, which means we're spending 27 cents on the dollar more than we budgeted for this year. Questions on that?
Yes, okay, and I don't know if I just misunderstood. So under claims, is that cash paid out or cash and charges are coming?
Under the claims, that's just cash paid out for claims for services.
Okay.
We have those fixed costs that are sort of a separate invoice that we receive monthly for the administration of the plan.
Okay.
Yeah, so then that total cost is the combination of those two items. Any other questions? The page behind that, we don't need to spend much time on. This is just showing the complete plan year from that we just wrapped up. So the 23-24 plan year. We talked through this at our last meeting, but I just wanted to put it behind here so you have it as a frame of reference to see a little bit of our history since becoming self-funded. Any follow-up questions on that page? Okay, so talking about history, this slide goes through our claims by plan year. So this goes back all the way to our 2019-2020 plan year, back when we were still fully insured. So we're looking at about 4 years of fully insured claims that have been paid out over the years. 1920 was pretty standard. As we look at 2020 and 21, we talked about this before, it looks, like we had this significant drop in utilization, but I suppose I can remind you that we were having a pandemic at that time, and so facilities were closed for any type of elective or planned procedures, and so nationally we saw claims drops during those years, as well as into 21 and 22, and then the national average in claims really started to rebound in 22-23, which we see illustrated here in our own plan. But the bar in red shows our final paid out claims for 23-24 at just over $7 million. We did talk about this again in our August meeting, but something has been adjusted here in that we are now able to quantify how much total stop loss reimbursements we have received for our large cost claimants. So even though we paid out about $7 million for 23-24, we also received about $760,000 in stop loss reimbursements for those large cost claimants, which we'll see the breakdown of that in a couple of slides. So that said, our plan essentially ran almost the same as prior years. Or the prior year, we just had to pay up front to be then be reimbursed, thankfully, to that reinsurance that we have in place. As far as 24-25, again, this is just a repeat of what we just looked at. We're running at just over $3 million for the current time period. Questions?
What percentage do you think of this is just a cost going up more than utilization?
That's a really good question. So medical expense trend is really at about 15 to 20%. So when we look at a service that say cost $50 3 years ago, it's probably upwards to $65 to $70 now, simply because of inflation or as medical technology advances, there's an additional cost obviously to those technology advances as well. So we see kind of a combination of those things. Yeah, that's a really great question and definitely something, that actuaries consider. And so when we look at kind of this year over year, it's almost always this, but a lot of that does have to do with not necessarily increase in claims, but an increase in cost per claim. Any other questions? The next page looks almost identical, I know, but this is our claims year to date, just so we can get an idea of where we stand for the same time period that we're in now compared to prior years. So each of these bars now is showing prior years for the reporting period of July 1st through October 31st. Elizabeth, nailed it, I saw the face. Looking a little rough. We're running at about 1.3 million higher for the same time period. Again, I will note that some of those are large cost claimants that are rolling into our current plan year. A lot of those large cost claimants, if you remember, started emerging in August, September of last year. And so we didn't start really seeing their claims utilization until early fall, early winter of this year. So we're starting to see some of that could be potentially roll over and run over into the new plan year too.
The stop loss monies we received, is that going to happen again this year too?
Great question. Let's talk about that on the next page. We still have coverage in place, obviously. We still want to always have that stop loss coverage in place when we're in a self-funded arrangement. It's as an additional protection for years like last year, for example. And so when we look at our large cost claimants, we'll continue to track what that might look like. So we still have the stop loss in place. This year, if you remember, we have what's called an aggregating specific deductible. We had one last year as well. This year, that aggregating specific deductible is set at $615,000. So what that means is when we have our large claimants, as they start to accumulate claims above $150,000, whatever that accumulation, that starts to build toward the $615,000. Once we have paid that $615,000 as a district or as a plan, then the stop loss will start to pay after any person gets $150,000 in claims. So it's a little bit convoluted. I know we've talked about it, kind of broke it down, a few times. That's kind of the simplest explanation of it. But at this point, we have 3 claimants that are starting to trend upward. The aggregating specific deductible has not been accruing yet because none of these 3 folks are at $150,000. Once any of them starts hitting that 150, anything on that end will start to accumulate towards that deductible for them. So right now we don't have any of that, but we will. Something that is interesting to me, and I'm doing additional research on, is on this large claimant report received from Aetna. You notice we have 2 end-stage renal disease patients. These are not new folks. We knew about them. We knew about them after we implemented our self-funded plan, but we implemented the program Renalogic to carve out our dialysis for end-stage renal folks. And their program is set to reprice claims. And so these folks can have this leading diagnosis, and maybe it's not specifically dialysis that they are receiving, that we are seeing these claims. But if they are dialysis, what needs to happen is these claims need to be carved away from the Aetna program and sent to Renalogic, where they will reprice those dialysis claims and will be much more deeply discounted. So right now I have Aetna reviewing these 2 members to make sure that the claims that we're being charged for are not dialysis. So this may change when we look at it the next time we meet. I know that's a little bit of background you probably don't care about, but just something to kind of know. So, we have that program in place to help reprice and get deeper discounts specifically on dialysis and on folks who are dealing with chronic kidney disease and things like that. But for these 2 folks specifically, we want to make sure that the dialysis care is being carved out to our discounting program. So this may change.
Something I'm curious about with the stop loss, so with them setting a mark at 150, is there a way like looking at say car insurance, if we pay more, does that bring that deductible down? Because it'd be interesting because, people tend to trend certain ways. Mm-hmm. So if we see, okay, we have 2 cases, and we have a 3rd situation, would those people trend? Because not to sound rude, but it'd be one of those things where it's like, man, if they got to 149, okay, so we invested in this bed that you don't sleep well in, so that's not a good thought. So if we find a way to bring that stop loss, is that a worthwhile thing to pursue? Or is it like, well, 6 in one hand, half a dozen the other? Is it one of those types of things?
That's a great question, and it's a great analogy. That's exactly how it works. Just like our medical plans, if we have a lower deductible, we pay a little bit higher premium, but maybe we don't pay so much out of pocket. With our stop loss, that's something we always want to look at. And so when we evaluate that at renewal or even at implementation, we ask them to look at all of our large claimants, our entire demographic, our historical claims, all of the things, and tell us what is a reasonable and appropriate, it's called an individual stop loss deductible. So what is an appropriate level? So for all of those things, encompassing all of those things, the number was 150,000. We can certainly look at a higher option to try to get some of that premium down where the deductible is a little bit higher, or we could drop that and try to get a higher premium. Because for the last few years, we've had that aggregating specific deductible, however, that is not ideal. And so the reason that we have those is so that our premium didn't skyrocket. And so that the 3 leading high-cost claimants this year was going to be 5. So that those folks don't have, just on an individual basis, a higher individual stop loss deductible. Each of them were going to be lasered. Remember I was talking about lasers and how fun that is? Because we didn't want to have lasers for each of those people that resulted in an amount higher or liability higher than the 615. We ended up taking that 615 aggregating specific deductible to keep the premium kind of neutral-ish. It was still a 25% increase, but to keep it there without having to incur more liability or risk more liability for the high-cost claimants that we were aware of. So in future years, hopefully, as these folks get well and you're not having to worry about so many high-cost claimants, we'll continue to research those avenues too to see if maybe we take less risk initially, pay a higher premium for that, or as we build reserves, then we can increase that deductible, save our premium, and kind of gamble that our folks will be healthier and we won't have to meet those deductibles. So a few different strategies that are in play, but because of these large cost claimants and that aggregating specific deductible requirement, we're not really in a position to make an adjustment to drop that down.
Okay, no, but that's good to know that if in the future, because I don't know if I looked at numbers right, but it was like kind of comparing quarter ones. We were looking at, if I did this right, looking at last year like a 92.25 and this year with a 1. I lost it. But that 127, so it's like, okay, well, just in case if the trend is spiking, then okay, maybe it's worth it to throw here or lower.
Right.
And then again, yeah, hopefully if things are getting healthier, hey, that's great.
Right.
You know, but that's nice to know that there is an adjuster to that to play with.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. And it shows that you're really understanding and comprehending stop loss.
I'm a math teacher,
That's
better.
true. Sorry,
Costa, you saw
you have a
that.
handicap, sir. Sorry. Any questions on these large claimants that we're looking at currently? Okay, so the next page just outlines again our large cost claimants and some adjustments for claims that were received after the fact. So, after we received, or we met in August, these are some of the claims that have incurred, that have been paid out. So our stop loss reimbursement on that far right column is reflecting that about $760,000 in reimbursements, as I mentioned. So this will look a little bit different than what we presented in August because we're seeing some of those claims that were maybe incurred in June were paid in September, October, et cetera. Questions on any of our claims?
These 3 people are new people, right, that are coming, the
For this year?
For the 3 people on here?
I don't think so. No.
But they're different than, like, these end-stage renal diseases are different than these guys, right?
They are likely the same people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. When you're looking at each of these reports, each line is one individual person. It's not necessarily this is the diagnosis across the board for many people. It's each one is an individual. Yeah. So when we see 2 end-stage renal disease people, it's very safe to assume that they're the same people from last year. They're not, we call that an emerging diagnosis. Yeah, so we'll see them kind of continue that. Again, part of the reason why we implemented that program was to help offset some of those claims. With end-stage renal disease, after you have been receiving dialysis for 3 years, you are eligible for Medicare. And so Renalogic also helps to facilitate that adjustment too. Any other questions on claims? Alrighty. Okay, so this last slide of mine is really just to talk about some of the items that we've been talking with the leadership team, some adjustments that we may be looking at for next year to enhance the program, to streamline some things, to add some additional value to the membership. And so we did speak briefly about some of these items when we met last time, but so just some kind of status updates really for you is we talked about potentially self-funding the dental and the vision program, and pulling that under our benefit trust, which we can do relatively easily. We have reached out to the incumbent carriers to see if they will allow for that, so that there's the least amount of disruption in network, et cetera. And both MetLife for our dental and IMED for our vision have provided quotes. So we'll be discussing those with leadership as well and determining whether that's going to be a good option or whether it's something we want to move forward with. We additionally talked about TPA quotes, which is our third-party administrator. So currently we're using Aetna for most of our services. We're using them for our third-party administrator, for our provider network, and also for our pharmacy benefit manager. And what we are shopping for is to look at a different TPA, one that is not owned by an insurance company. Because what tends to happen is, as I mentioned, we are under Aetna as a TPA, and we are sort of beholden to all of the solutions that they have in their package, which can be helpful in having, one TPA to do all of that and one kind of group to do all of that. But it doesn't necessarily allow for us to have flexibility in the autonomy that we want for our self-funded plan. So if we make a change, we will likely need to change our network, and we will likely need to change our pharmacy benefit manager, all of which can be done relatively simply. Obviously, those two specific items do have some impact to the employees, but we hope that the change that we make will be very positive, just given some of the feedback that we've had related to Aetna. So the three vendors that we have received quotes from or are waiting on one for quotes are Personify Health, which is the largest nationally private TPA, so not owned by any type of insurance company. Summit, which is a relatively local TPA, they're kind of a boutique TPA here in Phoenix area. And then AmeriVen, which you may be familiar with, was our TPA when the district was with the Area Benefit Consortium. So we're still waiting on a quote from AmeriVen, but once we receive all of that, again, we'll schedule some time with the leadership team and kind of review all of those options, and then likely do demonstrations or have sort of interviews or introductions of probably the top two preferred vendors. Questions on either of those items? Okay. Additionally, we've talked about adding some sort of cost containment measures where we're able to do some cost sharing when employees visit high value doctors or preferred doctors, et cetera. And so as part of that, we have also engaged with our actuary Windsor to evaluate our plans. Because in order to implement some of these specific programs that help with cost sharing or reduced cost sharing, so reduced deductibles, reduced copays, et cetera, we are looking at scenarios that may not be high deductible plan eligible. And so because we have so many folks enrolled in that high deductible plan, we have considered perhaps dropping the high deductible plan and instead implementing a PPO option that has a slightly higher deductible than our current PPO 1000. And that is not something that we would just do nilly-willy. We want to look at the data. And so we have Windsor, our actuaries, again, reviewing the plan analysis and looking at some adjustments to see where we would need to rate all of our plans in order to make that effective, either cost neutral or provide some savings even compared to our high deductible plan. We will stand by for information on that. Another item, sorry, was there a question? On the right column, another item that was mentioned specifically by the insurance committee here at the district was adjusting our program to allow for what we were calling an employee plus employee structure, whereby if two employees are married, we're both working for the district, but they can enroll in employee plus spouse or employee plus family coverage and still receive each of them a combined total combination of the district contribution. So if the district pays $100 a month, we wish it was only that. If we paid $100 a month for an employee's insurance, if two employees are married and they want to enroll together in their plan, the district contribution then becomes $200 for that specific enrollment. And so we talked through that. All we really need to do is amend the district policy. That's not something that the trust board would need to manage. And essentially we would also build that into Visions, the enrollment platform, so that when those individuals are enrolling, we can identify kind of that relationship, and the district can adjust payroll contributions accordingly, or deductions accordingly. This last item is specific to that high deductible potential plan change. As I mentioned, to make an adjustment to the high deductible plan, we would also be losing our health savings accounts that are attached to that. Right now, the district contributes $1,200 a year to the HSA for the folks who are enrolled in the high deductible plan. And so if the district decides to make an adjustment and drop the high deductible and HSA, we would have a PPO plan, which is not HSA qualified. And so the question remains, well, folks are used to getting these funds, and how do we accommodate for that? And so there's a program called a lifestyle spending account, which essentially is an employer paid only program. The employees cannot contribute into these accounts, but the employer essentially says, we're going to give you reimbursement up to this and that dollar amount for set items. You can match it to be specifically the same items that you would have for a health savings account. We can extend that to include reimbursement for gym memberships, or vitamins, or supplements, or fertility care, or adoption services, really to kind of extend to a full realm of healthcare, but also, emotional, mental, physical wellness too. And so that's something that we're kind of kicking around as well and doing a little bit more research on to see if that's a viable option, if we find that it makes sense to make the change from the high deductible to another PPO plan. So that one's pretty cool. With that one, the funds are essentially just held back for the employer, and then the employee submits through a platform, like an administrative platform, their request for reimbursement, and then they're reimbursed.
So what would the amount be? Same $1,200? You guys would keep that, or you would reduce it to try to
We haven't really
save?
come to that conclusion. I
Or
think
not
some
at
of it depends on what the cost shift would be in switching
yeah.
plans and then evaluating that. So, as much of an incentive as we need.
Yeah. And then it's
So-
dictated by the employer if there are not, a major maximum to it, there's not really a minimum to it either. But if the money isn't used, or there isn't a reimbursement request made by the employees, that money still stays with the district. So, employees could see it as, oh, well, now I have to submit for reimbursement, and feel a little bit of that angst or frustration with that, but it's still ultimately free money to them, to help cover the costs that they've gotten used to using the HSA for. So that would be potentially a way to replace the health savings account without having those strict restrictive rules of a flexible spending account, where if you contribute, you lose the money if you don't use it.
The other thing we're considering is if we do switch TPAs, do we want to do a plan change in the same year? Do we want to just switch the TPA and let the plans stay as they are, and then maybe evaluate a switch a year or two down the road? So that may not come into play for a few years, depending on kind of what we feel like is maybe the right direction to go. If it's too much change at once to do the TPA and change somebody's plan, we're just trying to evaluate what's the best way.
Could people's coverage, if you decide to go down that route where you go to a PPO plan, some of these high claimants, could their coverages change, or?
Not really. Typically a PPO is a richer benefit than a high deductible. Yeah. So what we would do, and what we're having the actuaries review, is sort of mimic a plan with a similar actuarial value as a high deductible plan. Will slightly decrease compared to current, because right now our high deductible plan, because of the HSA contribution, is actuarially a richer plan than our other two options. But it's the lowest cost plan, so it's sort of like we're underfunding that plan. So we should almost charge less for the other two plans and more for high deductible. And so we won't really see a big change in that, and especially for these high cost claimants. For the folks who are incurring, we saw 1% at $300,000 in claims, their deductible shift from $750 to the $2,000, that's not really that substantial. And when we see those sort of shock claims, the deductible really doesn't make a huge difference, right? We're still going to have to pay those types of high cost claims. That's the stop loss piece that is most important for those folks. Questions on any of this or anything that I've discussed?
Any questions?
Thank you.
Mr. Ponder, you're up next.
Right. So just to kind of fill in some gaps on the financial piece. So as far as the plan is concerned, even though 27%, something like that, where are we at here? There you go. So even though we're seeing 127% estimated loss ratio, the solvency of the plan is, not in jeopardy. Everything's fine there. We still put money in. We prepaid a good chunk of money last year to put us in a good position for this year. We are kind of, certainly keeping an eye on that and tracking that, maybe estimating probably a 12 to 15% increase is kind of where my mind is on a budget number right now, but we will know more once we get closer to the end of the year and the time to actually build that in the compensation. Allison can give us a better number from the actuary company on really what should we be looking at. But as Luciano and I start our preliminary discussions on the budget next year, we're anticipating 12 to 15% rate increase. And then we'll kind of look at it from there. But, 127% doesn't sound great, but we're okay financially, with the situation we're in. It's still a much better situation to be in being self-funded than if we'd been fully insured, because that increase would have been far higher than the 9% we had to go with. So even though it's not great news, it's still a much better position for us. So from a financial perspective, I don't foresee any significant issues. We just have to continue to monitor how this is going, and then Allison brings forward ideas on ways we can maybe mitigate risk or move some of that to other companies like Arena Logic type of products. So we still have our overall goal of decreasing the cost of family care. We know that's pretty expensive, and so we're hoping the employee plus employee structure can help offset some of that a little bit with families that are both working here. If they're not, it doesn't help that family a whole lot, so we're still trying to buy down the difference, but maybe it recruits more people to come over to our district and save themselves some money on the benefits side. I don't know, so, but those are some of the main things that we're looking at from a financial perspective.
You have a lot of people married.
Yeah, just get married for the benefits.
I think that's what marriage is nowadays.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now those shared families increase. Oh, there's more kids. So.
Yeah. Any questions or concerns from the financial perspective?
Any questions from the board? No? Okay, that's it, Dennis?
That is
All
it.
right, next item, any good of the order? Do board members have anything they'd like to share or see at the next meeting?
Well, just sharing being on a campus. I know a lot of people are excited to hear that HRs were coming, so I think that was great. I think that's starting to put faces to names, so that way employees who aren't familiar, because we're all about that door-to-door life. Hey, what's going on? Now they can start seeing. So I think that's great. That presence, that's a big plus.
Okay.
I've been hearing more talk about people using some of the international services, so that's pretty cool too. So I think the literature is getting out there. So it's just that's good. So I don't know, maybe. Just keep pumping that up there. Like, I know it's hard to get all across the place, but there is some pros coming out of it. So, definitely shout out to hearing that, to seeing that in action.
I would like to add, we had spoken before about using some of the interest money that we earn on our account to hire an insurance or a benefits consultant. So we do have that, or not a consultant, sorry.
Coordinator.
Thank you. A benefits coordinator. So we do have that person, Yulissa Rodriguez. She was from HR. She moved over to be that person, and so she's really starting to head up the education side, the communication side, and really build that up. So we're happy that she came over. We're happy to have her. So she's on board, and we're hoping to see that really benefit us down the road too. So.
That's awesome. Yeah, great.
All right, our next meeting is scheduled for February 20th, 2025, and we will adjourn at, what time is it, 5:57?